Welcome to Drinks with a VC, where we explore the humanity behind investments. Grab your favorite drink and join us as we laugh, learn, and liquor up with some of our favorite venture capitalists.
Whether you're a startup founder, fellow VC, LP, or just curious about the investor ecosystem, you've found the right podcast. Please like and subscribe.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Drinks with a VC. Thanks for joining us via whichever platform you're using to view or listen in. I'm Vik Laquara, co-founder and general partner of seed fund Green Cow Venture Capital. And as always, I'm joined by my friend and co-hostess with the mostest, Bree Hansen, who leads business development efforts at DWAVC, a wonderful firm and sponsor that provides outsourced accounting, fractional CFO, advisory and orderly wind down, and HR consulting, headquartered in Silicon Valley. If you are a startup in need of those services or a VC looking to make sure your startup is in good hands, give Bree a shout. Today's episode is also brought to you by Fidelity. Fidelity is committed to supporting startups at all stages. Using the Fidelity Private Shares platform, founders can automate their equity management operations and financings in a single collaborative hub, using the automated cap table and data room to prepare for their next round of funding. To learn more about how Fidelity can help your company grow, please check out the episode description in the link below. So Bree, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I had a fantastic, relaxing weekend. As you can see, I've got this beautiful forest behind me, but it's not the woods here in the Bay Area. It's from where our guest is from. So I'm excited for who we have coming up today.
Lovely. And I know that I say this before every show, that every show is special. I think Drinks with a VC is special to me, special to you, because it affords us the opportunity to spend time with our peers in the investment world, with whom both of us have so much respect and admiration for. When we have people on the show that we know previously, there's an excitement really about sharing that person's story with our listener. When we have a new friend on the show that we don't necessarily know, it takes on a whole different type of excitement. So I'm a little giddy about this one. Our listeners are going to be on this kind of discovery journey with us. And yeah, should we get it kicked off?
Yeah, I always love meeting new people. It's always an adventure on this show.
In today's episode of Drinks with a VC, we're excited to dive into the life and work of another woman of South Asian descent whose career has spanned everything from groundbreaking product development to strategic venture capital investment. She began her career at Google as one of the company's first product hires, playing a crucial role in the engineering strategies for revolutionary platforms such as Gmail, Blogger, and mobile search. Her path then took a significant turn toward the public service as a founding team member of the U.S. Department of Energy's Advanced Research Projects Agency, that's ARPA-E, during the first Obama administration, where she was at the forefront of advancing innovative energy solutions. Continuing to make her mark, she led the climate technology practice at Alexandria Venture Investments in DC, helping to steer capital towards pioneering startups and venture firms that meld healthcare and deep technology. Most recently, she served as a managing partner at the production board of venture studio committed to nurturing transformative technology companies in health and sustainability, actively participating on multiple portfolio boards and fostering the growth of next generation enterprises, including Wellio, which was acquired by Kraft Heinz, and Spirux, that was acquired by Entelus Stryker. Her debut $25 million fund as a solo GP launched in 2022 and backs founders leveraging AI, data, and software infrastructure to create transformative change in healthcare, climate, and financial empowerment. Her portfolio includes Alafia, AlphaGrid, Nectar Climate, Verse, and Waymark. She was named a rising star in 2021 by Business Insider. Let's welcome, finally, after that long sentence, the founder and GP of Twine Ventures, the pride of Erie High School in Erie, Pennsylvania, Leshika Samarasinghe.
Wow,
Cheers.
that was amazing.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers. Thank you so much for having me on. We were chatting about how the team comes up with bios before the call, and Vic's, don't worry, I got this. And you, that was out of the park. Because I've had a very circuitous path, as you just disclosed, but you made it sound, you know, quite special. Like I had
It was
planned all.
almost linear. It was meant to be. But
Exactly. That's what I pitch at Twine. So thank you.
that's right. That's right.
I think it's all going to make sense after today's episode. Let's start with what you're drinking and why.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So I am drinking a mint julep, which I don't think I expected to be straight. I forgot that they don't, I thought it had ginger beer in it. But this is just straight bourbon. So we're already off to a strong start. I like bourbon drinks and I love mint. I find it very refreshing. And I usually do to add a little bit of ginger beer. I used to drink that. I'm from Sri Lanka, which we'll talk about, but that's a very popular drink there. And so it brings all of those things together. And then also, you guys were so incredibly generous and got me a really nice bottle of Woodford Reserve with this very fancy Kentucky Derby pattern on it.
Oh,
And I've actually toured this distillery. I have a good friend who's from Lexington and went to her wedding many years ago and really enjoyed my time there
yeah.
in Kentucky.
Have you ever been to the Derby?
We did not go to the Derby, but there were events where we had to wear hats and do all of this stuff. But I have not been to the Derby itself, and unfortunately, but have spent time doing some of the bourbon and whiskey tasting. But it's a really special part of the country. And funny enough, it's actually not that far from where I grew up, which was the other surprise of the show, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah.
But Bree's background, I had no idea. That was such a nice little Easter egg to kick off the show.
Yeah, sometimes I like to do that. And not every episode, but this one, I was like, yeah, I think that looks beautiful. We're gonna go with, we're not sure, is it Asbury Woods or Asbury
Yes.
Woods?
The former.
Okay, okay. Asbury, okay.
Asbury.
Just wanted to make sure.
Asbury.
Asbury,
That's
remember, Bree.
Don't mess this one up, Bree. Don't mess this one up.
Don't mess it up. So tell us a little bit about your background. We know that your parents left Sri Lanka because of the Civil War. We'd love to learn a little bit more about them and their backstory and why they left and how you were born.
So we actually all left together. So I actually immigrated from Sri Lanka myself with my family as a toddler. I was 4 years old when we moved to Erie. My dad's brother was living there at the time and could sponsor us for our green card before we all became naturalized as a family. My parents were actually, I was born in London, and then 6 months in, we moved back to Sri Lanka. My dad was a civil engineer there, and my mom had a degree as a teacher. And they were planning to settle in and build a life there. And then the Civil War started that became a 20-year ongoing conflict. And they realized it would be best for their young growing family to get out. So it was really a story of emigration. And we had the family and community in the States. And so we're able to come to this town in the Midwest, which is really where I call home in the picture that you have behind you.
Yeah.
Which is Erie, Pennsylvania.
We actually don't, I don't think there's really any light that is shed on what's happening in Sri Lanka. And we don't need to get into huge specifics here, but in doing some of the background for this, I don't know if a lot of people understand that the Civil War started in 1983 and was ongoing, like you said, for till 2009. And how big of an impact that it had on so many people there. Upwards of 70 to 80,000 people have been killed during the conflict. And it's just crazy, man. And this kind of kicks off a broader discussion that we often have on this show around origin story and how sort of the backdrop of something like the Civil War in Sri Lanka can have these massive ripple effects in migration to a country like the United States, and in particular your family going to Erie. What part of your kind of childhood that you can remember and the Sri Lankan roots that you had, what do you remember the most? What was like the strongest sense of culture and identity from Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I don't know. I probably came to identify more with Sri Lanka as I probably in college actually, because growing up in the 80s, like especially immigrating to a new country, so Sinhala, which is one of the main languages there, was my first language. My parents stopped speaking it to me when we moved because they thought that it would inhibit my ability to learn English. Unlike now, where we're like, oh, love for kids to learn multiple language, it increases synapses connecting and all of
Yeah.
that. But yeah, they stopped speaking it to me. They didn't want me to be confused. And there wasn't really a sizable Sri Lankan community in Erie, Pennsylvania. And so I didn't have as much exposure to cultural traditions, language, religion. My parents were Buddhists, like temples. And we just spent a lot of time focusing on assimilating, or to the extent that we could, because Erie was also not a particularly diverse community, but I did really appreciate growing up there. I still, some of my closest friends are from there. But yeah, so it was really when I got to college, and also I should say that because my parents immigrated, my dad was an engineer by training, but couldn't get a job in that area. They ended up owning a small business, which is a laundromat in Erie. So we didn't have a ton of resources growing up. So we didn't really get to go back there much. I only went back once. I was only really on a plane maybe 2 or 3 times after we immigrated, and one of which was to go back to Sri Lanka. So I didn't necessarily have that connection. And then in college, it's one of the reasons I studied international relations, because I wanted to really expand my worldview and learn about Sri Lanka, South Asia, just other countries, and in general, having grown up in a somewhat kind of like insular way. And then I went back there and I spent a whole summer there in college working for the US Embassy there, which is really neat. And that's when I got to reconnect, met all of my family there as an adult, and tried to relearn the language. I thought that it was in the back of my head somewhere, but it wasn't really. My cousins gave me a hard time. They were like, "You speak Sinhala with a Valley Girl accent." I was like, "I'm from Erie, they don't have a Valley Girl accent." I guess I was coming from California, maybe. And that was the time that I really reconnected with that part of my like history and family.
Yeah, yeah. How's your Singla now?
It still sucks.
It still sucks.
Yeah, it still really sucks. Although we had a pretty special winter where I took my kids for the very first time just this past Christmas, and they got to learn a few words and then meet again. I still have a bunch of extended family there. Both of my parents had 7 siblings, and so there's a ton of cousins there. And yeah, it's still, I try to give them some exposure and continue. Actually, this trip, I even learned to cook some of the dishes, which I hadn't really spent time on before. I think I'm almost even more aware of it now with kids and wanting to pass some of that along. But growing up, I didn't have as much exposure to it.
Yeah. Do you have siblings?
I do. I have an older sister.
You have an older sister. So you
Yeah.
were very core oriented with your sister, and then like, all right, let's focus on assimilating growing up. Were you very close with one of your parents more than the other? Were you a daddy's girl? Were you very tight with your
Yeah,
mom?
I think definitely a daddy's girl. Yeah, because we were just able to, again, he was an engineer. We were able to talk about, just was very curious about the world, and we were able to talk about different things we had read, and still continued as I grew up.
Yeah. When you were going through Stanford, and I don't want to go too far ahead, but when you were going through Stanford, you were majoring in international studies,
International.
relations. Um, was there any part of your parents that were like, why are you majoring in international relations? What about being a doctor,
Oh my
being a
God, like
lawyer,
100%.
engineer?
So it's funny. In some ways, my parents were actually not your typical South Asian parents in that
Yeah.
they were running this business. They weren't around a lot of the time my sister and I were both latchkey kids, which I think was also like common when we were growing up and where we grew up as well. Kids did what they wanted after school, like roam the neighborhood and like bike packs. It wasn't like now where kids are overscheduled and have a million things going on. But I think because it just gave us a lot of independence. And so the wanting to do well at school and other things, I think really came internally because we had that space. And so looking back, I think that was a really like great thing that they did, where I used to be like, oh, so and so gets $10 for every A she gets. And my dad's, hey, that's great. If you have to want to do well, like for your own sake, not
Yeah.
for our sake, which is actually, again, pretty rare. So we just had a kind of developed our own motivations for wanting to study hard and focusing in the areas that we did. And then what was the other part of your
Oh no,
question?
so between your mom and your dad, you spent a lot of time with your dad. This is a common theme, right? I think we've had three incredibly successful South Asian women on this show that all kind of document a family that was pretty progressive in their thinking with regards to find your own way, but
Yes.
also cultivated a mindset of being curious and having almost an engineering mentality of building things, like breaking things down into building blocks. And it seems like you've got some of that, and you inherited that and then took it to a completely another level.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I hadn't necessarily thought about things in that way. So I appreciate also the kind of psychoanalysis of my own. I'm probably like not as self-reflective as I probably could be at this point in my career. So I actually haven't done a whole lot of unpacking of my upbringing and why I am the way that I am, or the way that family ties into it. I think in a way that other people have probably spent more time thinking about. But you had also asked about the doctor and lawyers. So my older sister, I think this is also just typical of older child. She was pretty regimented and then
Yeah.
did go the doctor path. As I mentioned, she went to school in um, St. Louis, where you are now, and maybe they already had that box checked. But and then my path, it was just because I have done so many different things, they were very confused. Even today, my mom is just not a world that they've had any exposure to. Growing up, again, they ran a small business. My mom was a clerk at a department store. And she's like, oh yeah, Leshika works with starter companies. It's so cute. She called startup
Starter companies.
companies. And then earlier on in my career, they would just be like, she's thinking of going to law school because it was just way too complicated, like all the different things that I had done. And so it's just much easier to describe things that way versus she's doing a venture foundry and not your typical going to government. It's not your typical path. But no, they've always been proud, but just it's definitely hasn't been as cut and dry, I think, as you typically see in South Asian families. And I think part of that is because they really raised us to be independent thinkers, just again, have a lot of internal motivation, which was great. And then I was grateful for the community I grew up in as well. So Bree has the lovely Asbury Woods picture behind her. Erie, PA is really a rust belt. I don't know if people use that phrase anymore, but it had a lot of manufacturing in the
Sure.
70s and 80s. Plastics, and GE had a really big locomotive factory there for some time. But a lot of that shut down over the years, and there wasn't as much um, happening from an industry point of view, especially in recent years. They're trying to change that they have a big insurance company and like top hospital there, but there's not a ton of jobs. But there's a lot of natural beauty. It's right on Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes, and there's 10 feet of lake effect snow in the summer, but it's really gorgeous in the winter, but really gorgeous in the summertime. And these amazing forests like Asbury, which was a place where I volunteered when I was little and was a budding environmentalist because I used to go and clean up trails and do all sorts of stuff in the woods there. And then also when I got to high school, would study the eutrophication of Lake Erie and was the poster child for toxic waters in the 70s with some of these plastic manufacturing sites like dumping their effluent into the lake, and then it got cleaned up. And so it was interesting getting to study that, but that was also my first exposure to environmental health side of things, which
Yeah.
is something that I'm, still remain passionate about and really shaped my career. So that sense of place, I haven't really reflected on it in this way. So it's great to talk about it now.
Great.
Fine.
I think this is a perfect segue into our always loved segment, VC unboxing. What do you
Yes,
think,
I
Bree?
was thinking the same.
Okay, excellent. All right, Bree is going to, uh, Leshika, you're gonna take a sip of your mule, and Bree, please let her know which box to open up
So
for
you're going to
box
be
it.
opening up the two boxes present today and gather, give, grow.
Okay, great.
Very excited to see your reaction here.
Wow, okay. So the first one is a back to the roots organic microgreens grow kit that I could
Yes.
grow some microgreens and put it on my avocado toast, which is literally what I had for breakfast this morning.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And then
Oh,
what's
okay, box number
what's in the
two, they go
Okay.
together.
Okay.
We know that you have a brand new home, you love the outdoors, you have two young boys who like to do stuff. So we got you a mushroom grow kit and a microgreens kit. You can grow your own mushrooms that you can cook, because I know you also like cooking, so you can grow and cook your own mushrooms.
That is so kind. Thank you. This is so funny because I have a annual white elephant with some of my closest friends in SF, and last year I gifted a grow your own mushrooms
Oh,
kit.
that's hilarious.
And afterward, I was like, this is such a great gift. Who wouldn't want to grow their own mushrooms?
We regifted
Actually,
it.
Bree and I both work out of the ferry building.
Yeah.
It's that one of those stands in the ferry building that has mushrooms.
I
And
bought one of
so,
those too, where they're like the
yeah,
brick in the
the law,
bag.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And so I was jealous. I was thinking, when a white elephant, you can steal the gift back. I was still thinking of doing it with this. And they were pink oyster mushrooms.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's
That's
a
amazing.
startup that back to the roots. And one of my VC friends, her husband owns the company. So I'm a big fan. I grow them at home myself. Not every day or anything. Every once in a while, I love to grow those things, and you could eat them. They're really fun. I think your boys will like them too.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I have an 8-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl.
Oh,
But
it's
yes,
a boy and a
they'll
girl.
both
Why did
like
I think you had two
yes,
boys? A boy
they
and a
will
girl. Do we want to start talking about the kids, Vic, or do we want to go back into a little bit more into Pennsylvania and
Yeah. So actually, on that note, you have a boy and a girl. They have interesting names, and you're gonna have to tell us why. Deccan, I believe,
yes.
and
Yeah.
Aaron. Is that right?
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. How did you come to those? Because those are very unusual names, beautiful names. But how did you come to that?
Yeah, thank you. So they also, it's funny, we were just talking about sense of place, and that also, they're both geographical names. And so wow, you're really, again, I'm like not so thoughtful to put all of these things together, but now that we're talking about it, it was meant to be. So Deccan is my husband's from India originally, and it's main plateau in India. It also means south
cool.
in Hindi. So we wanted something that ties back to South Asia, but has a strong sense of geography, and then also is just sounds strong. And then
Yeah.
Errol was a C that actually got cleaned up, had its own kind of environmental issues and got cleaned up. And it's also a term in chemistry. So there's a bit of a scientific component to it as well.
Yeah.
But I just liked the sound of it.
Yeah.
That's so
We,
cool. Very
It
thoughtful.
is that is very thoughtful. I actually really love just like the thoughtfulness that went into that versus, I hate bagging on Kanye, but I'm going to do it. But like South and Southeast, North and Northwest, I don't much.
Well, I was like, how am I coming up with names versus like Kanye? That was like my main kind
Was
of
that the thinking?
comparison. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Make sure we're sufficiently,
Well, you
although
saw-
funny enough, I did. So naming, I actually have a thing around naming. Like I love naming. So including startups.
Yeah. Starters, as your mom might call them, but yes.
Starters, yes, exactly. Starter companies. But I do give unsolicited baby naming advice to any friend who's having so far there's been at least a few that have taken me up on them, including one. It's funny because you mentioned Kanye, but it wasn't because I came back West. I suggested the name West, and my
Cool.
friend gave that as a middle name to her son. Twine, obviously, I came up with it. That's, purpose and profit are interlinked. And then also a twine string is like humble but strong. It's part of the values that we try to represent at Twine. And then at a portfolio company we founded at the venture studio that I was running prior to building Twine, that was a next generation plant breeding company. And that's also a place name, which is funny, but I named it Ohalo, which is one of the birthplaces of agriculture. It's where they first found evidence of human cultivation in modern day Israel. I think like 70,000 years ago now.
Wow.
So yeah, and then there's one more. There was Talus is a name that it means it's like the rocks that are at the base of a mountain. And so any founder who was ideating for the longest time, I'd be like, name your company Talus Bio, like Talus, tech. I was
Ooh,
just trying to shop that name around to anyone who would take it, who was like naming a company because I thought it sounded strong. And then
nice.
finally, one of my friends, he was starting, it's an ag tech company, which is an area that Vic, they're doing distributed fertilizer production.
Okay.
So now
Okay.
he has Talus Renewables and they're off to the races.
That's amazing. So I'm a huge fan. I know, Breeze, you're a big fan of wordplay and symbolism. Green Cow Venture Capital, another. So I'm with you on that. I'm. It's funny right now as we're thinking through this, I'm hitting myself over the head, wishing that I'd come up with a bit for this show, name that startup. But we're gonna have you back on again someday. And when you are, we're gonna play a game called Name That Startup. It's gonna
I'd
be.
love that. Maybe
What do
it
you
could be
think
a
on it?
side hustle. I just thought
Yeah.
just read some article about the guy who renamed Arthur Anderson Consulting to Accenture, and
Yeah.
I don't know, it's like bazillions of dollars for each renaming that he does. But turned out that name, he picked it from all these employee submissions. Shouldn't that employee get the benefit of that? But there's a whole business to be
Okay.
had in naming.
Honestly, I was gonna suggest just go on Fiverr and spend maybe 30 minutes during your very busy day where you really don't have 30 minutes, but find 30 minutes to go on Fiverr and give your services to name their starter companies, right? This would be amazing. But now you're pointing out you'd be leaving probably too much money on the table. So there you go. That's no good. Okay. Getting back to the kids that you did name, Deccan and Errol, you were talking a little bit about how your love of climate, the environment, and championing a healthier climate, a healthier environment started at a very early age. Something that I get into conversations with emerging managers, just venture capitalists generally, just like everybody else, they have kids and they are dealing with overworked kids, overextended kids, whether it's sports or extracurriculars. One thing you don't hear a lot is kids that are being pushed into doing the sort of environmental work, cleaning up a forest, planting trees, etc. Is that how do you try and find that balance with your kids? And then given your experience both in the public and in the private sectors, how are ways that other parents can get their kids more excited about the same issues that drove you to be excited and build Twine now 20, 30 years later, right?
Yeah. Okay. There's, I think, a couple threads to unpack there. One is the kind of the over scheduling piece and all the things kids are doing now and how to make space. One of the things that we try to be intentional about is just, and it's hard because here there's so many activities happening at any given point, especially as they get older and they're in elementary school and so and so is doing baseball and so is doing this. And quite, you don't want them to miss out on social opportunities more than
Right.
anything. But I really, and this part of this goes back to, I think, how I grew up, where I just had a lot of time on my own to work on things and noodle. And I just really try, especially on the weekends, to just not make sure they have just a lot of available time. We have opted out of, they probably do a lot less, I think, than other kids their age, because we want to make sure that there's time to be bored, to just play with each other, run around, explore. We have this meadow next to our house, explore the meadow, and just have that time to just free play and think and just be kids versus having it be too structured of time. And the second is like that, just running around outside is that time in nature, I think helps with that appreciation for the environment, which is a lot of how I got to spend time growing up as well. So we do family hikes pretty regularly. It's a lot of my kind of free time on the weekends is just hiking, especially we recently moved to the North Bay. We were in San Francisco proper for the last 8 years. And it's just so beautiful up here. And so getting to spend that time with them, just being outdoors is great. And then also doing a more concerted effort around cleanup. So we're actually doing one in a couple weeks, like clearing a trailhead. When we were in the city, there was a local community farm we used to volunteer at. And so trying to do that in a non-forced, but pretty kind of organic way where they naturally, you're doing it every now and they see it as an extension of the time that they spend in nature. I really enjoy this. It's really beautiful. let me try to maintain it has been great. And then I think on the third point about just how you cultivate that awareness, I actually think there's much more awareness of climate change and the need to protect the environment even than when we were all growing up. But unfortunately, it's almost it has turned, I think, especially with even as old as Gen Z, into climate anxiety, where it's like, oh my God, the world is falling apart. And that's the last thing that I want my kids to feel. I want them to feel
Mm-hmm.
like hopeful, inspired, that they can help be part of the solution, and that we can live in a world where we have both technological progress and like an environment that is just is whole. And I think there's this aesthetic that I really like called solar punk. Do you know? I don't know if you like
No.
look it up. It's just I don't even know what it's a I think it's an artistic like genre where it's because a lot of times in movies and media, when we like literature, when we think of the future, it's often dystopian, right? It's
Yes.
Mad Max, it's like
Mm-hmm.
Wall-E, which was like the saddest movie ever and made me cry. And where the world is eventually just a big junkyard and we're just like locked on our screens and it's just everything's really hopeless. So no, we can actually have the kind of innovation that we're investing in now in Silicon Valley, but that can
Yeah.
hopefully be in harmony with a sustainable planet. And so it's this imagery around it, like you've probably seen like the skyscrapers, but that have plants growing all over them,
Plants
like
everywhere.
that
It's
kind of
like
stuff.
Singapore on steroids,
Exactly. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
right?
I
Yeah.
literally had a dream that San Francisco looked like that once. And I was like, how are we going to get living walls on our buildings?
Yes, exactly. So instead of like it being like, oh God, like we have to like we have to roll it back. It's almost like a Luddite, fewer people on the planet. It's just, no, we can do all the things. And I think that's part of what, you know, I think you'd be hard pressed to be in the entrepreneurial ecosystem and an inventor without being like a techno optimist. But I think really believing that you can have all the things and they can all come together, and then imparting that on your kids that, hey, we can build these solutions. It's not all dire. And we just have to be part of figuring out what those solutions are. And like
Sure.
imparting that from a young age is something we talk about as well. So whenever I see kind of fun stories about, or here's what the future could look like, I like to share that with them
Sure.
as well.
Sure.
That's amazing. I have a friend whose daughter, she was getting a little bit traumatized by all the climate change news. And I was telling her, I'm like, hey, I see startups all the time that are really making a difference and give me hope. So I'd love to hear, Leshika, what you're seeing that's giving you hope out there in terms of startups that are making a difference.
Yeah, there are so many different kinds of companies then. So as you, Vic, so generously described in his opening intro, I was involved in the first wave of climate investing like over 10 years ago now. And so have seen kind of the cycle and like seen lots of different kinds of solution. But I think the thing that's different now is how broad-based the movement is and
Mm.
the talent that's motivated to be building in these areas. And this is like all sorts of areas. So at Twine, we're mostly enterprise software focused, and just to not, I know we're not supposed to talk about the firm, but we are really investing in like the what we call the enabling technologies. And
Sure.
so picks and
Mm-hmm.
shovels
Yep.
that are help accelerating the energy transition, the decarbonization of industry,
Mhm.
the transition to renewables. And but there's like a whole host of other areas that companies are building in. But I think what's different now again is how many people are coming from traditional tech, from like bio-based backgrounds, to be working on climate. It's just really, it's like more than ever before, and such a passion and momentum. It's just really
Yeah.
exciting to be part of this movement now. And then we're starting to have some policy tailwinds, which is new. When I was in DC, we all thought there was going to be federal climate change legislation passed at that time, in the first Obama administration. And now it's finally here with the Inflation Reduction Act. And so there's a whole host of things that are coming together to make it not just assisting existing industries, but creating entirely new ones. That's really exciting.
Yeah. I want to pick up on something that you mentioned there. You've been investing in this space for a long period of time, but I want to go back to when you were 2002, 2003, you just graduated from Stanford. with an international relations major. And I guess I want to ask you the question, did you think that you were going to get to where you are in terms of maybe not venture capital, but did you feel like you were going to eventually make your way into being on the frontier of what was going on in climate impacted industries and climate tech? Or was that something that was made that opened, it was at a door that opened for you a little bit later on? Like, how did you
Yeah.
kind of think
Yeah,
through that?
yeah. So it's definitely been like a through line in my path. As I mentioned, growing up in Erie and being a little environmentalist. And then at Stanford, I studied international relations, but my focus was actually on global environmental policy.
Okay.
So I eventually did make my way into government, but that I would go into the foreign service and, be a diplomat of some sort,
Yeah.
but working on, at the time we didn't have COP, but it was there was like we were working on like ozone and kind of other things
Sure.
back in the day.
Yeah.
And in climate change, there wasn't as much awareness of that, but just like these broader environmental issues. But then Google was recruiting on campus my senior year, and they had this really special mission of organizing the world's information and making it universally useful and accessible. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, this is a really mission-aligned company that seems they're building something really special that does seem to could potentially have like tremendous social impact. Uh, and so I think going there also comes a little bit back to geography. It's Stanford, like the heart of Silicon Valley, when like
Sure.
startups like that were just getting going, and was grateful to be able to join the early product team there, and then get that kind of company building exposure, that exposure to tech, that exposure to product. But at the same time, from like my like I was like, oh, I still want to be working on issues of sustainability. And Google at the time was just doing search and ads, like not the
Sure.
plethora of things that they're doing now. Now
Right.
you could build an entire career like working on climate within Google. They have
Within
like
Google, right.
probably 50 different dedicated teams
Yeah,
Wow.
absolutely.
doing that, but they didn't at the time. And so that's part of why I left and went into like public service, which is another kind of thing that I had like that was rooted from my time, even like in college, interning with the US Embassy, that I wanted to do, and then work on environmental policy in particular at
Yeah.
the Department of Energy.
If you were going to look back at your 4 years at Google, right? And this was like really, these are seminal moments in Google's growth and product like development and roadmap, right? What is the one takeaway, or maybe one or two takeaways from an operational experience standpoint that you hold close to your chest and that you utilize that kind of mindset or that thinking or that uh, that train of thought for how you view companies and how you invest?
Yeah, so I think if I'm being totally candid, I think there's a lot of learnings around developing best in class products. At the time, though, it was really, we were so early that it was actually quite chaotic when it came to like when it came down to processes around like product development and the like. And we had this like cash cow in AdWords that really allowed us to have some leeway as
Yeah.
to how we were doing these other things. The thing that the company did so well, which is the main thing that I try to impart to my founders and what I look for in founding teams too, it was just like best in class team. Like their bar for hiring was just so incredible. It was such an amazing community of people, like
Yeah.
those early days. And to this day, that's probably been one of the kind of most impactful communities in my career and path today, and certainly in building Twine. My anchor is in Fund One, were some Alphabet family offices, and then was able to bring in some who I'd known for the bulk of my career, and I was able to bring in some other institutionals and other amazing family offices like Reid Hoffman and others. But it was that like alumni network. We all
Yeah.
knew each other. And now I'm co-investing with them. They might be like starting new companies that I'm investing in, and it's just an incredible like community and ecosystem. But they were really thoughtful about the way in which they hired and the processes they put into place and the bar that they had and the focus on culture
Yeah.
those early days. And that's just like the most important thing when it comes to
Sure.
building early stage companies, right? Is like getting your people right. And then, so that's obviously the pre-seed seed stage, the most important thing that we're underwriting. And then obviously it's like a product that makes sense in a market with some tailwinds, but most likely those things are going to change to some extent at the earliest stages, right? And so it's really just the team. So that's the thing that was probably most special there, and again has been just like really helpful to me.
Yeah. What came first? Harvard Business School or thinking that you wanted to get into venture?
HBS, I knew I wanted to. So Google, again, they were like just doing search and ads. I'm like, okay, I want to come back to, I've had these themes around public service, around working on sustainability. I want to do mission-oriented work. It's not, oh, that's what you want to do. Oh, I should go to Harvard Business School. It's been not
How
the
did you?
obvious place that you would pick for a do-goodery vibe that I clearly had. But so I was actually going to go to the Kennedy School, which would have fit more, like checked more of those boxes. But then I like, honestly, I was like, oh, that's like a lot more like school and like tuition to do both. And then I felt like I could do maybe like an MBA would open up more things. And I was, grateful to have been accepted there. And then at the time, a lot of this movement around climate, like there was companies starting to be built at MIT. They had just launched this like new energy initiative, and there wasn't as much of an entrepreneurial focus at HBS as there is now, where they have a lot more curriculum and support around it. And I like to talk to those founders spinning out. But we had some amazing companies come out of my year. It was Cloudflare, Rent the Runway, like Remitly. They're all like public companies. And that, again, was just an amazing community and ecosystem who have been really supportive as I've been building the firm and just expanding my kind of venture career. But yeah, and then it was the HBS and then working in climate.
Climate. Yeah. So just thinking about when you were at HBS, and then I think your next job after HBS was at Alexandria.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
In DC. And by the way,
No,
lost
it
in the
was
shuffle.
ARPA-E. It was ARPA-E.
It was ARPA-E and then Alexandria.
Yeah.
Okay, so ARPA-E, were you also based in DC at that time?
Yeah, for ARPA-E and Alexandria. So ARPA-E, it was so when I was in business school, Obama was running for president.
Yeah.
It was like just a really he just spoke to a lot of folks of that era.
We can say, like, when you say Obama was running for president, I'm sorry, but I still have goosebumps.
It's like a thing. It's just, it really is like a thing. And I like volunteered on the campaign, like when I was in grad school. And it was just because you really just, unlike, it seems like it seems like another time compared to the political climate.
Yes.
Now, I remember when we thought Mitt Romney saying like binders of women was just so offensive. It's nuts. It was like genteel.
How we wish we could go back to this.
It's so crazy. It's just really crazy. I can't even comment on the current discourse, no matter where you land on the spectrum. It's just, it's a very different political times. But that back then it was like a special time. It was much more about coming together than pulling apart, although people have different kind of commentary looking back, but at that time it was a really special time, 2008, and having had this kind of draw to public service, having worked on the campaign, wanted to find a way to be in DC because you could sense that it was this really unique moment in history to be there and do that work in some way, which again was not very typical for like a business school grad. Most of my friends went into private equity or consulting, and they're like, you're going to government and like getting paid what? Like, this is like insane. I was definitely subsidizing myself for some time. I think especially now in Silicon Valley, we can be very insular sometimes, and where like government is this thing that's just annoying, but it's okay if you think it's annoying, like work to engage and change things and go back and forth and try to do things in the way that you see fit, like run for office, do 2 years in and come back to what you're doing. I wish so in that period of time, like you started to see some of that back and forth. I wish we saw more of it now. I actually just hosted the head of ARPA-E, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, the current head of ARPA-E, Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy, for it was SF Climate Week last week for an event last week. And part of the discussion was around, hey, how did you decide to enter public service? What are your thoughts for the audience on encouraging folks to do that kind of back and forth, because we need as many smart people as we can
Sure.
implementing policy, crafting policy, executing policy. So that was the thinking there, to go spend some time there. And this was this brand new agency modeled after DARPA that was funded by the Recovery Act. Because you'll remember that was Recovery Act was after financial crisis and and so there was like funding that went to various initiatives, and establishing this new agency to help be one of the cornerstones of US innovation policy was one of the things that got funded. And so it was like the startup within the DOE. So that was how culturally it was it wasn't like as much of an adjustment, because it felt chaotic and
Sure.
all the things that I love about startup world. Even with Google, like Google was only like a couple thousand people when I was there. And I was like, oh, this is way too big. I went to smaller and smaller offices. I went to their New York engineering office, and then I went to Bangalore, which is like 10 people, and helped grow that team, because I'm like, I need to be in as nebulous of environments as possible. And so that was the same with helping shape this new agency as part of, and I was one of the only people who didn't have a PhD on that team. It was a lot of like highly technical folks who were thinking about ways to invest in like white space and
Sure.
kind of climate R&D. And then my role was to think about, okay, what is the business case? Like, how do we bring this tech to market? Who's going to fund it? So then I got to liaise with the venture community in providing funding for those projects. So that was really my first exposure to VC was at ARPA-E. And then I joined one of the firms that I worked with called Alexandria. Yeah, because at the time there were a number of climate funds, but it's not like now where there's so many there's so many different types of firms. And I think for a young person like getting into venture, there's more places to choose from. And Alexandria was an amazing place to get started, and I could stay based in DC, but they would take a bet on someone like me who didn't have a venture background.
I'm trying to think of some of the starter companies that were hot at that point, like SunPower and others, right? There was, I think that point that you made earlier around climate change and climate anxiety, and wherever we made that. So climate change was like the very early days of, hey, climate change is happening, and then there are folks that are looking at alternative energy plans,
Yeah.
etc. It's fascinating to be a part of that. When you So I have so many questions about this, and I have no idea how we pack this into these recordings. But generally speaking, we all felt like Obama was like our best friend, or like someone like Obama was the JFK for us, and the Obamas, I should say. So Barack and Michelle both.
Yeah.
But then there's a level at which you know them and you were associated with their administration. So there's something that you feel that's even tighter and close knit that you might not necessarily telegraph to people publicly, but that you hold closely. What is that thing? I want to know, what does that bring up for you?
It's absolutely the way you're even describing it. It is this, and I hate to be cheesy because it was like the iconic poster about hope. But it ties back to what we were talking about earlier with the messages I want to share with my kids. It's, hey, we can do this. It's not, don't give up hope. These are all solvable things. We just have to apply ourselves. That's what it felt like in DC at that time. We were going to work on this together. We're going to figure this out.
Yeah.
And so it was this idea of hope, of tackling big problems, but also of working on things together. And I just wish we could, there's definitely, I see a lot of that in the communities in which I'm investing in now. And I'm really grateful to be investing in, again, human and planetary health. These tend to be like very mission-driven founders and investors, which is why it's very kind of motivating to be working in these areas, and people tend to be collaborative. But yeah, there was like that kind of sense of we're all in this together. We're going to figure this out, which I think is like the flip side of hope. Is it was really pervasive in that era and in that place in DC at the time. And it would be great and I think we still have that in certain pockets, but I wish we could do that as part of the broader national discourse right now.
Did you have an Obama moment? We've asked Kate this. She was very tight with Martha Stewart. We've had Priya, who has waxed poetic about her time with Jack Dorsey. I'm wondering if you have
I did get to meet him. I did get to meet him. Funny enough, it was like a South Asian like event at the White House. So
Cool.
we got to meet, but it's not like, we got to spend a lot of time, him or Michelle, which you're right, it was like the two of them who were just really special.
Sticking into the public sector for just a moment, we talk about having hope, and there's this sense of that hope comes from having some sort of continuity of leadership, of thought leadership and leadership both in this area. And you're starting to see a lot of amazing, the best and brightest entering your industries. But then if you go back to the public sector, do you have hope as you see ARPA-E and how it continues to run right now? Is there reason for all of us in the private sector looking at the public sector to have hope about them getting their shit together and continuing to lead and put pressure on administrations and on governments to move ahead? Or do you feel like the onus is really on private sector here at this point, and we're in trouble if we leave it up to the public sector?
No, I think there's a lot of great people who continue to lead. Again, we had this amazing leader out here last week who previously ran the mechanical engineering department at MIT. And I got connected to her through one of my friends that I convinced who comes from the private sector, who's very much out here, like running innovation at a corporation. She's, I'm thinking of giving back in this way. And I was like, oh, like you got to do it. And so she actually went on to the same commercialization team that I was a part of. And so you're absolutely seeing amazing people. Jigar Shah was another person who I worked with at the Department of Energy who came back to Silicon Valley, maybe he was technically based in DC, but he ran like a really well-known project finance, like private investment firm called Generate, and now runs like the loan program at DOE. So there's a lot of great people who have both the kind of financial and like commercial chops who are doing that back and forth. There just needs to be more. I think in all levels of government. And again, instead of thinking it's like this thing that we don't want to deal with, both like geographically and then also and even like now when it comes to crafting policy around AI and all of these things that will really impact the work that we do here in Silicon Valley, like just broadly, it's get engaged, go in, like lobby, build networks. There are a couple of firms that I think do a great job of having more of an engagement dynamic, like General Catalyst, I think, does a good job of trying to develop frameworks and do engagement. There are others as well. But no, there are a lot of things that give me hope.
Speaking of this, look, you've talked about the Obamas and the inspiration that they played. The kids are a huge importance and influence in your life. And we talked a lot about how you try and instill the same kind of, not instill, expose them to the kinds of things that you found important and that shaped you when you were younger. Lost in the shuffle is how you went from London to Sri Lanka to Pennsylvania to California to Boston to DC, back to California. You're an adventurous soul.
Bangalore, don't forget Bangalore.
Yeah, Bangalore.
And Bangalore, yes, thank you. And I'm sorry, by the way, hey Dad, you're in Bangalore. I'm sure you're listening at some point in time. You've been everywhere. And to celebrate that, we have a VC unboxing part 2 that I think we want to jump into. Is that right, Bree?
Yeah. Time to open the next gift.
Yeah. Bree, by the way, I think this is the most excited you've been to drink. Like, Leshika, you picked the perfect drink for Bree right now.
Or it's just the company, Vic. Come on. Give me some credit.
Well, no. Yes, it's the company, but she's around me all the time, so I've already bored the shit out of her, right? But here's the thing. Bree doesn't get up and go, I know this for a fact. When we have folks on, sometimes it's wine, sometimes it's just whiskey, sometimes it's this. You picked mint julep, and I swear Bree's face and her eyes lit up, and like it was like, look, I am pumped about this. And she's sitting over at Shack 15 right now, drinking one of their amazing.
I know we could have been together at Shack 15. We both worked at Shack
Crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So we
it's a
should
good,
open up. Should we open up the second VC unboxing?
was it this
Yes,
one?
let's do it.
Yes,
That's
it's
it.
that one.
Okay.
By the way, you can already tell the production quality in our podcast has improved because we have boxes for our VC unboxing, not just bags. And we have some really fantastic wrapping paper for all of these things. What do we have in
Wow.
front of us?
52 weekend adventures in Northern California.
We
Excellent.
would, yeah, we
This is
thought
what
you
we
and
like
your
to do.
kids and your husband would have a great time having adventures all over Northern California since you're one of the adventurous souls. And hopefully there's going to be a lot of nature activities in there because
This is amazing. This is literally what we do. Like we love to do. This is part of why we moved to the North Bay so that it's easier to go to. We love West Sonoma. So this is, wine country is really beautiful, but we love the Sonoma coast. Point Reyes is like one of my favorite places on the planet. Like Sebastopol, Guerneville, Forestville. It's like the redwoods,
Beautiful.
the coast. It's all like super rugged and gorgeous. And it's just like within an hour drive of us. And so it looks like this covers all of the best places in that area. And that's exactly where we like to spend time.
I love
Thank
it.
excellent.
We're just meeting and you got my number. Like the mushrooms, Northern California kit.
I want to point out that I had no part in this, and Bree is the best gift giver on the planet. Really is. Very
That's what we do,
thoughtful about
the
these things.
questionnaires, and you try to be thoughtful and just think and it does take some time. Like we do spend a lot of time. One thing we're doing at my brand is we are changing to, I'll probably cut this, but we're changing more to a mountain adventure theme. We're going to be with you on your startup journey. So
From a
we're
startup
all
company,
sharing internally what our favorite hike is. So I'd love for you to share your favorite international hike and then your favorite local hike.
Yeah. These are good questions. We should add this to the Fidelity Five.
I know, it's fun, right?
It is fun. Okay. I have a favorite domestic US 50 states hike, but
What's yours?
Should I go?
Yeah, what
Yeah,
she's
go ahead,
thinking?
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
While you're thinking, I'm going to give you a moment. It's off the Kahala coast on Kauai.
Oh, it's the best.
There's an 11-mile stretch up there in the northwestern part of the island, right off of Ka Beach. And apparently a lot of people used to do it nude.
What?
But yeah, like the whole out and camp and back kind of thing, nude.
Wow.
We have a friend of a friend who I won't mention on this podcast, but these are stories that I've heard. I've done only a portion of the hike, and I want to go back and do the whole thing one of these days. So Laura, my wife, will go back and do that one of these
We're
days.
in. I want to do a boat in, hike in, and then a swap. So then people come in and then they bring your camping gear on the boat. And then you hike in and then you swap. So then but I want to be the one going back out because the tide, I think, takes you back out. I don't want to have to go against it.
And I will say that I'm a huge sucker for coastline. And so coastlines are amazing to me, whether it's like the Pebble Beaches in Carmel or whatever it might be. But if we're looking at recent international trips, I will say going and hiking between the different villages of Cinque Terre in Italy was really stunning as well.
That's cool.
Those are not hard at all. I am not like
it's so stunning. I haven't done that since I was like backpacking in Europe in college, but it's like it's so stunning.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. All right. Okay, you've had enough time to think. Let's go.
Okay, all right. So let's see. So local, I mentioned loving Point Reyes in particular, which is just a treasure of a national seashore that we have just an hour north of San Francisco. That has all sorts of different ecosystems. It has beach and coastline. It has a ton of different types of forests. And there's one hike that you can do there, the Tool Elk Reserve, where you go out to this point and there's all these like wild elk that are just surrounding you. And it's just really magical. But that's like a 10-hour hike. So that's if you have serious amount of time, but it's really quite special. International, we were talking about what a wonderful place Sri Lanka is to visit. There's a mountain there, Adam's Peak, that Adam and Eve, supposedly his footprint is there, and that you could wake up basically before dawn and hike it and see the sunrise there, which is really magical. But the one that came to mind first was the Ropeburn Trail in New
Oh,
Zealand
wow.
is really great to get to from the Bay Area because it's a direct flight and you get there and it's the same day, at the same time, but a day ahead. So it's actually pretty good from a jet lag perspective. And there was just so many amazing hikes there. And so that's a really special one too.
Nice.
So what's cool about New Zealand that I want to see, but I haven't, is they have a redwood forest there, and it's the only redwood forest outside of Northern California.
Huh.
And
I
it's
did not
not
know that.
native. They brought the trees there. So like in 1900, there was like a tree swapping conference, and they were all building railroads. So they were trying to figure out which wood was going to be like the best wood for trees. And New Zealand, for some reason, were like, we'll try the redwood. And so they grew a redwood forest there, and it didn't work well for the railroad, but it makes for a fantastic magical forest. So they built like a whole bridge thing through these trees that you can go to. So it's on my list of redwood forests that I want to visit.
That's so
That's
cool. You know
amazing.
what else they have there? So I'm like I have a lot of random like favorites, which my kids will say, and I'll tell you my favorite animal after I tell you my favorite insect, which is in New Zealand, which is the giant weta,
What is
which
a
I
giant
think
wet?
is like I think it's the largest insect in the world, and it's like this big, and it only lives on these like little islands off of the New Zealand main islands. But it's like it's this adorable like giant cricket-like creature. And if you Google it, there's pictures of it eating a whole carrot because that's how big it is. It can stick
Yes,
a carrot
and
in its
it's
mouth.
literally the first picture that comes up of a
Yes, yeah,
giant
that carrot
weta is
picture.
is a
Yeah,
carrot.
so I really wanted to see one when I went to New Zealand, but I think you got to go to the special island.
This is where I strongly disagree with you. And I
That's
do not have a favorite insect at all. I know I'm a horrible human, but I
it's not the
just
cutest thing you've ever seen. I feel like you should. I don't know if you can bring it up onto your screen in the
We
podcast.
can.
I think it's amazing. I
We're
think
gonna
it's
edit
okay,
it
we
amazing.
will.
in. It's very easy.
It'll be
And then
right here.
and then like my favorite animal, which my kids know because I talk about it all the time, is our nudibranchs. So I like scuba. I like don't have very many hobbies because I'm just like you're building a venture firm. It's like building a startup. You're just
Hmm.
like all in, so you don't have that much time to be interesting. But scuba diving. So I do try to scuba dive like once or twice a year when I can. And like nudibranchs are like the little sea slugs. So other people dive to see manta rays and sharks and like all this crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And I love like the tiny little things that are just hanging out on the coral reef,
Yeah.
and they're so cool and intricate.
Were you able to scuba dive the Great Barrier Reef?
We didn't do the barrier reef. We went cold water diving in New Zealand, which
Oh,
is really special. But barrier reef, like we did that last trip to New Zealand, we went to Sydney, and but it's like a whole other trip to get to the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah,
You gotta go to
it's
Cairns and like so we only went to Sydney that time.
have you been and are there must be quite a few diving spots off of Sri Lanka, right?
You know, it's so funny. I've never been diving in Sri Lanka. I learned to dive in Indonesia off the
Okay.
coast of Borneo and this
oh
really
cool.
remote, the Deravan Islands, which is takes a couple days to get to through a couple like paddle jumper planes and boats and it's like the most untouched reef that you'll ever see. But yeah, but that's like the most special place I've been.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
sounds amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
What took you there?
Before
Just
before you
yeah.
jump into that, give me one moment. I want to be cognizant of your timing. And do you
Yeah.
have a hard stop?
No,
Where are
I'm
you
good.
at? You okay?
Okay.
My hard
All right.
stop is basically when
All
these
hell
little
breaks
ones.
loose in the
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Okay.
Then you'll know where it's probably
Fair
over.
enough. Fair enough. Okay, good. I just wanted to pause
Oh,
and
because we
just
still
make
got to
sure that
get
we weren't
to
running over.
Twine, production board,
There's a lot.
Twine,
There's a lot that
Fidelity
we need to
Five.
go
There's a
through.
lot to
So
cover. Okay, so
no,
let's
but sorry.
get
Hopefully you
to
like and
Question.
hopefully
Scuba.
you edited this because I imagine it's like it's so funny when we were like chatting at the beginning. I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna even talk about for an hour? No one's gonna. This is gonna be so boring. Like people aren't gonna. Now, hopefully, we'll see if that might still be the case. But hopefully, you can edit enough
Oh,
pieces
yeah.
that could be interesting for people.
We do like to think of us as really the only long form podcast in venture out there. I don't everything is like Harry Stebbings, the 20-minute VC,
Yeah.
whatever. It's I don't know if you get to know people in 20 minutes. I think it's more fun to go long and yeah, go big
Yeah,
or go
you're
home.
definitely not talking about giant wetas in 20 minutes. That's
No,
for
no, I don't think you
that's
can
and that's
cover
going to be
giant
a
wetas.
crucial part of whether or not you decide to take capital from Twine is hold up, what's their favorite insect?
Yeah, yeah. What is going on here? Yeah,
But I think they might appreciate the fact that you have a favorite insect because you are an environmentally thoughtful person. And I think that really comes across here. That's what I'm enjoying about it is like just how much passion you have for climate in our world and your international perspective. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. This is great. Sorry, we don't normally pause like this and reflect on
No, we really don't.
episode while
We'll
we're
edit that out
filming
too.
an episode. But yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Bree, at the risk of sounding, I'm not trying to sound weird or anything, but do you remember your question? Because I can't remember your question. I know you asked it.
That gin and tonic was very full. I'm getting to the end of my bourbon.
It was very
I know,
full,
me
and
too.
now
This was just straight bourbon. I like really was counting on there being some ginger beer in here, and there was not. I think you guys did that on purpose. I think you're like, oh, like it's just the drink is just bourbon and mint, right? Like
Bree works
like,
in mysterious ways.
I think there was supposed to be a mixer. No.
Technically, if you think about a mint julep, it's crushed sugar.
I got it wrong. It was a Kentucky Mule. It was
Kentucky
bourbon, ginger beer, and
bourbon,
but again,
ginger beer.
so I don't actually, yeah, I'm not like I don't have a very so I normally actually will drink bourbon on the rocks, but that felt a little aggressive for saying that was like my go. I'm like, oh, I should make it into a cocktail.
I think the cocktail's fun, first of all.
Me too.
And then, yeah, I'm nowhere near. So Charles Hudson referred me to
He's got drunk
close
with us too,
friend
by the way.
who's the best and who is just I adore. And he is such an amazing pay it forward person in the venture ecosystem. He's helped so many of us with advice on getting our firms off the ground. And but he is like very sophisticated when it comes to his drinks, like his whiskey, like he has an app that he takes notes on all of the wines and like cocktails that he ever like liquors that he ever drinks. And he taught me about Pappy Van Winkle. Like I didn't even know what that was. So I shop at Trader Joe's and my husband gives me like a price floor on the wine that I buy. He's yours, and this is part of my growing up in the Midwest. Like I think it's just we just like we're pretty low key. So
what is your husband's name?
Shad.
Tell Shad to back up. There is no floor. You can find amazing.
It would be like $3 Chuck in our household if I like. That's a little. The point is I don't have a very sophisticated palate. So even in coming up with a thoughtful drink, I'm just.
That's okay. You did a yeoman's job in that, and I would have enjoyed it if I had mint. I just was like, look, I've got 2 of the 3 ingredients and I'm too stressed and too busy to get the third.
Fair enough.
Whatever, gonna go.
Yes.
But I did cut my cucumber very nice.
I saw that you put the cucumber, the garnish makes all the difference. It's these little details.
Let's move on to Twine Ventures.
Yes.
And I think
which I
shared with us.
I'm gonna have a side hustle around naming. We decided on the show.
You shared that with us, and I think it's only right that Twine Ventures is also very grounded in a specific thesis. And a lot of people say that they're thesis driven, but if you look at their portfolios, there's a disconnect. If you go to the Twine Ventures website and you go up and down the portfolio list, there's not one company that doesn't fit your investment thesis. And I just want to take a moment to applaud that, because it takes real guts and it takes real conviction to continue investing in what you really believe in and not jumping on a hype cycle, not following on a company that might be out of your stage range and is going to be a quick pop and would be great for IRR. There's something really special about that. I want to cheers you.
Wow, Vic, can you be part of the Twine extended team?
I'm always happy to be. Yes, I'm happy to be that. But cheers to you on that.
Thank you.
And now I want to give you a chance because you're an emerging manager. It's funny, this term emerging manager is bandied about, whether you're on fund 4 or 2, 1, or whatever.
We definitely
But
are. We're on one, but yeah.
yeah, you're fun one. Tell us, because you had every opportunity to be a generalist given your background, but the thoughtfulness of which you approached the thesis, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, yes and no. And that I think hopefully one of the things that's come across is the shit that I care about
Yeah,
just as an individual.
yeah,
And I don't know that I could spend time, again, when you're building a firm, it's like building a startup. It's like every waking moment. So it
yeah,
has to be things that you care about deeply, which
yeah,
for me comes from way, way back. And so I think it was always going to be around these mission-driven themes, which for me is primarily human and planetary health. And I really appreciate your pointing out, yeah, we do try to do what we say we're going to do. I think
yeah,
there are a lot of firms that use language around like being mission driven, but when you see, or we just talked about my path to date to founding Twine, my partner Ethan led data science at Stripe for the last 5 years, but he was a health economist. He worked on public health projects at the World Bank, worked on climate. He's also done this back and forth between public and private, like health and climate, but then
yeah,
also with a foundation in tech. And so we've both walked the talk in our careers, but then also it is like reflected that thesis of human planetary health, it is reflected in our portfolio. And I think that is the thing that most resonates with founders. They're like, oh, they can see themselves in the
yeah,
portfolio.
yeah,
Um, and more than, again, we've both been around for some time, so we have networks, we've known people, but it's not like we're Twine is a household name by
yeah,
any means. And so you really have to, when you're like learning about the firm, it is, oh, these are companies. I know these founders because I've been working in healthcare, I've been working in climate. I know these companies, these are missions that I think are interesting because the
mhm,
folks that are building in these areas, like we just talked about, I think both in climate and healthcare, it is a really unique moment in time where like there's more talent than ever building
yeah,
in these spaces. I think part of that is also just from these industries being in like a time of generational transformation where we're
sure,
undergoing
sure,
the energy transition, decarbonization of industry, healthcare is moving to outcomes-based care. But importantly, you're also seeing like the first wave of like tech, like digital health companies, like
yeah,
climate tech companies, people are spinning out of those. So
yeah,
they have some experience in these industries that are nuanced, right? It's not the same as if you were coming from Google, like building an ad tech. It's
sure,
there's regulation, it's complex markets to sell into. There's a lot to learn about the industries themselves. And so these founders like have tech DNA, but then also have understanding of building in these spaces that you're then starting to see the next generation of companies
hmm
that can
hmm
really knock it out of the park when it comes to making an impact. And so those are the companies that we're investing in. And so there's a lot of them to choose from now. So it's how we're able to build a whole portfolio just focused on them and hopefully still do well.
yeah,
We have quite a few that have been like popping and it's exciting. And I just love working with the founders building in these spaces because they really care. And I think they're able to attract just amazing talent, which going back to the beginning of the conversation is the most important thing. The
sure,
pre-seed stage is that vision, like we were talking about Google, like what was my main takeaway from Google is the kick-ass talent they were able to recruit. And part of that was the mission and being like really maniacal about that. And I see the same qualities in the portfolio founders today because they like are really like that's what they care about and they're able to attract people who are able to go through the ups and downs of a startup because they care about those missions.
yeah, yeah,
That's excellent. We recently spoke with Priya, who was saying she has a founder attributes sheet. Do you have anything like that you use, or is it more pattern recognition when it comes to identifying who's going to be a really successful founder?
Yeah, I feel like the word pattern recognition kind of gets like I don't know, that's can be challenging, but I do have, again, it is like our portfolio does tend to be founders who they are often like seasoned. It might be like their second or third companies because they have some
mm,
experience from building in that first wave,
sure,
or
sure,
at least being part of the founding teams or leadership teams of companies in that first wave, and so have had some exposure to the complexities of building in climate impacted industries and health, which again, it's like it's complicated, But if you can figure it out, there's big businesses to be built, especially at a time where these industries are in transformation. And then also there's an explosion of data as we're digitizing like patient health records and notes, as we're collecting ever more analytics around weather or, whatever it might be. And so you're able to build these like data-driven companies, and combined with advances in artificial intelligence and all of the underlying technology shifts that are happening. So it's like a unique point in time. So yeah, so from a founder profile perspective, I think it is that having some of that experience, like being able to bring that to bear. It's, I think, some of what like we look for is the combination of the technical and product understanding with just ability to sell, because that is what you're doing as a founder. You're constantly selling for fundraising, for like customers, obviously, and actual sales to your recruits, and building that amazing team that we talked about. So we really look for a balance in those two things, or at least having co-founders who are able to complement each other in that way, but that ability to really tell a narrative. But then we assist them with that as well. It's probably one of the main areas that we plug into, is in the kind of fundraising piece.
Yeah. I really want to key in on something you said there. And Bree, you and I have, I think this is a common thread with every single investor that we've had on the show. And it's funny because, Leshika, you said this very early on, an hour or so prior to this, around picks and shovels, and investing in the picks and shovels that enable great kind of use cases that create that transformational change and disrupt industries, old and new, right? All these things. I think this thread that I want to pick up on is AI, data, all these great software platforms that we have nowadays. You aren't focused on the technology, you're focused on the application of the technology.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Leveraging that technology.
Yeah, less so like foundational models in those areas necessarily.
And when we look at that, you look at AI, big data, etc., so much of today is focused on generative AI, right? I personally think that there's a lot more to what the next wave of AI is, which is around augmented AI and the connection between human workforce and AI kind of platforms working in cahoots, right? Working together to do something. I know this is a really long-winded question way of asking it, but here's the thinking. Like, you've strayed away from AI for AI's sake. And simultaneously, and we haven't really talked too much about it, it's not just climate tech, it's healthcare systems, it's fintech, and specifically financial empowerment.
Yeah, and fintech, we do have some companies that are just financial empowerment focused, but we also look at a lot of fintech at the intersection of areas, so like health payments integrity, or like climate finance. And
how do you look at the application of those, and how do you start to evaluate the application of those technologies in those industries? And more specifically, I think AI is obviously the hot button topic everyone has been talking. I've been investing in AI since 2008, so I feel like I'm before the hype curve existed. But how do you look at that, and how do you evaluate that technology and applications of that technology in those spaces that we mentioned?
Yeah, I know there's just like a lot of broader discourse around applications versus like the core technology, and like who it's like the kind of like winning is going to accrue to like the incumbents on the core tech. I think in our industries there is a lot of value in thinking about the specific applications, because again, there's a lot more to navigate around being really clear in a value proposition, to be able to navigate like a sales process, and all the things that you have to do when you're just building a company in general. For example, we just have a company that just announced a Series A that's applying AI. Thank you. Yeah, we've had.
Which company was that? We can take a moment.
Oh, it's called Alafia. They actually are like AI applications for identifying waste in medical billing. So they're working with payers they have this AI claims auditing assistant. So as healthcare payers are looking at claims, and they're going through like reams and reams of data and deciding what they're going to contest, this AI assistant is able to just like process all that information for them and be able to come up with what codes they're going to be able to say yay or nay to in like a really condensed manner. So it saves a ton of time.
Yeah.
And they've been able to onboard like a number of customers in that way. And it's just like a really specific use case that ultimately will reduce costs in the overall healthcare system. And so I think there are in these areas, I think it makes sense to think about application layer. How have you been thinking about it
Yeah, I mean, so that's nice of you to ask. By the way, I'm gonna just point this out also. Leshika, in our 30-minute kind of pre kind of conversation before recording, I think you were always just asking questions of Bree and I about how we thought about things, etc. And it's not something that I'm used to or Bree's used to on the show. I mean, in the 32 episodes, I don't know if I think I'm sure people are interested in it, but we don't specifically call it out. So that's fun.
yeah.
But
If you're just like, I don't know, I'm just curious. We haven't met, so I'm like curious.
no, okay. So look, so this speaks to two things about you. Number one, that so Leshika in her questionnaire, I don't know if she explicitly said this, but I'm going to paraphrase here. But I think your superpower is being able to connect with people and find common ground with people of all backgrounds, all things. I think that's very apparent in this conversation to me, at least. Bree, I'm sure you agree. But the second element is I think we see another common thread amongst really successful VCs around curiosity and how not how I think, but what does the next person next to me think? You talked about being at a table with a bunch of PhDs and at RPA, at ARPA-E. I swear I'm gonna get that right at one of these days. But at ARPA-E, how you're the non-PhD around this table. I think as venture capitalists, something that drives all of us is being around at a table and not being the smartest person and learning and being a sponge in those situations. And so similarly, for me, the way that I evaluate things is absolutely very similar to you in that you look at the use case and the application and are you solving a real problem? And how important is this problem that you're solving? I loved working at SK Telecom Ventures, and they had $100 million corporate venture capital firm. That was my entrance into venture. But I wasn't in love with the investment thesis, right? It was around internet, mobile, digital media, and all of that. And I felt like when we looked at building Green Cow Venture Capital together, Maggie and I really said, we're going to focus on applications of these technologies in industries and in problems that are around scarcity and inefficiency in all these different industries, whether it's farming, finance, whatever it might be. So long-winded way of saying, I think you have to look at the use cases. You have to look at the applications, the practicality. So many founders, and I hope all of you founders that are out there listening or watching this episode, you heed sort of the warnings that are in the fine print of this episode, which is don't build something and then throw it over a wall and hope people are going to consume it. Don't do something that is imitation inspired. The reality is that you should be looking at a problem and looking at the pain points of those problems, how to solve those problems. And I think that's the heart of what you're getting at as
Yeah,
well.
1000%. And honestly, that was actually one of my main takeaways from ARPA-E, like working with all these brilliant PhDs, which is indeed like a very humbling experience because you're like,
Yeah.
I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room, which is always the case with founders as well. Like they know way more about what they're building in than you ever will. And the only thing you can do is okay, just keep asking questions around like letting your curiosity guide you. And that was the same case there where, I like part of our job in like commercialization, which is really, okay, how do we turn this sexy science into a business is just making sure that we were not building technology for technology's sake, which I think is like what you're saying. It's, are we solving a problem? What is the value proposition? Like, who are we selling into? How are we selling it? All the questions that you ask yourself as you're finding product market fit. But yeah, that's definitely something that's, I think is happening in the AI world in particular now. But yeah, I still lead with all of those questions when we think about the use case and the applications and like all the things that create a moat around a business from being first to market and still, yeah. So I think that's great to call it out.
Do you feel like I've had a couple of conversations with folks, particularly in the fintech space, where there are a lot of vendors. There seems to be a vendor for every fucking thing, right? And we're over serviced in a lot of ways. And then it becomes a race to see, how do you really create real stickiness and adoption of that product? How do you go about helping or shepherding your founders, utilizing the operational know-how experience that you gained back in Google into creating real adoption of the products and the services that they're serving? And because it's one thing for someone to buy it, but then another thing for someone to utilize that software or that service in a way that reduces churn and increases stickiness and all those other great things. So you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's so many ways to go about that. I think that it's just, especially in an enterprise sales cycle, like they're often somewhat high touch to start, right? I think a
Yeah.
lot of my companies are really early days,
Yeah.
and it's more of a true partnership than just let me throw it over the wall and see what sticks. Like they're oftentimes like really embedded with their initial customers, and they're seeing what works, and they're seeing that it really does, like they're using it regularly, and there is that retention, and they're solving a real problem that can be sticky over time. And so I think like spending that time with your initial customers to know that you have something, that it's not just like a one and done, that can be ongoing is just really critical.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna ask you a question. And this could either be a softball question or this could be like a really intriguing one.
Okay.
So many times when people say climate tech, they're discouraged by sort of the amount of capital that needs to go into building out a solution. Health tech is another great example. Fintech's probably, as sexy as it is, it's not far behind, right? People are like incredibly capital extravagant. What's the word I'm looking for? Anyway,
Intensive.
intensive. Thank you. Capital
I
intensive.
like extravagant though. That makes it sound like it's like a Louis Vuitton of
Little Louis V of
starter
industries.
companies.
Yes, it's the Louis V of the industries. But I look
Yeah.
at climate tech as the Louis V of startup companies. And I guess I want to get your thoughts on that, because you're an early stage investor and you are taking big risks and investing in these companies, hoping for the same exits as all of
Yeah.
us, not in climate tech, that are 10, 100xing. We
Yeah.
want to look for those unicorns. So what do you say to that? And what's
Well,
the
that's so climate is not like a sector. So there's so many different, it's about decarbonizing existing industries, about creating new ones, but there's so many different flavors, and there's a lot of different funds that focus on, they might have a vertical focus. They're about decarbonizing real estate. There's firms that are just focused on nuclear fusion. There's so many different ways that you can cut it, right? From like energy generation to the built environment to carbon capture to industry. Our thesis, going back to the beginning, it's around the picks and shovels.
Yeah.
And so we do focus on the more capital light, like software models. And for us, it's so I think, as hopefully it's become clear in this conversation, I am like passionate about working on these problems just personally. But if you are, Twine is a returns driven fund, right?
Yep.
So for my LPs, I actually don't know that I have any real, like in my fund one, like impact investors. Everyone's a financial investor. And they're like, hey, these are these growing industries that you can accelerate through these enabling technologies, where you're basically taking like a vertical SaaS or a B2B SaaS playbook and applying it to the solar industry, which is like here to stay now, or to the industry, which has had its fair share of headlines recently, but it's a stay. Like we're transitioning to electric vehicles, to electric fleets, and there's a whole host of tools that can now help us accelerate that transition. One of our companies is doing sales enablement software for EV installers. So figuring out where they're going to site their charging infrastructure and assisting them with that sales process. So it's like a classic B2B, but applying it to this industry where it requires some understanding of how those players think and how they're going to be growing, some of the kind of macro tailwinds in their favor. And our companies do tend to be on the more capital light side. And then the downstream investors actually tend to be more kind of generalist software investors where they're like, oh, you're just taking this approach, but you're applying it to this area. So yeah, there's certainly more capital intensive parts within climate, but that hasn't been historically where we've focused. And part of that is just the size of our fund. We have a 25 million fund one, and only have so much capital to support the companies throughout their life cycle. And I think there is a good amount of downstream capital availability for a software approach. And then also it's just, as we're evaluating companies, a lot of them are post-revenue, even at the seed stage, because that's you're able to do that with software. And I've done both software and deep tech in my career. And like deep tech, it's like big swings. It's also just very energizing. And when it works, it's like can be massive, but you don't know for some time. And so you just have a little bit more data to be able to evaluate some of these businesses, which we like. And then also it's just like the skill set of the team. Again, my partner coming from the kind of data side of things, we've leaned into that when evaluating companies.
Yeah. We're getting a glimpse of how you were able to thread the needle and raise capital effectively as a solo GP, right? Just the way that you articulate the different flavors of investing in climate tech at a point where I think a lot of LPs, and maybe you're just over that inflection point where a lot of LPs are like, oh, is climate impact? No, it's not fucking impact. It's impact
I'm gonna make you
plus
money.
ROI. There's an ROI here. There's alpha here that we can capture. What were the biggest challenges for you as a solo GP raising that first fund? And what is the biggest advice that you would provide? One kind of truth nugget that you would provide other emerging managers looking to follow suit in a not very friendly fundraising environment right now?
Yeah, luckily I do think it's getting a little better. I think it's never easy to be raising a fund one. I think last year I was grateful to not be in market. I think it was pretty like bad last year from all my everything I hear from friends. I feel like macro perspective, rates like they're not going to be cut as soon as we thought or would have liked, but hopefully sometime this year the IPO window's like slowly like creeping open. There does seem to be more reception.
Congratulations to Bree Vik, by the way.
Yes, yeah, that's right, that's right. There is one thing that I'm hearing from institutional LPs is you're always having these conversations, whether we're not in market right now, but there does seem to be a lot more appreciation for smaller funds where they're like, oh yeah, smaller funds can outperform. That's just math. It's much easier to return a $50 million fund than these multi-billion dollar funds that like require, like $10 billion exits. You can have like sub-billion dollar exits and the math still works. And there does seem to be, and the crew might be rolling up shortly.
Okay, all right.
I was like, oh no, like I'm gonna turn into a pumpkin.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think having, especially for a fund one, having some anchor investors can be really helpful. If you have folks that you are able to have some decent percentage of the fund, then if you have that, you can get to half. If you can get to half, you can get to the. I'm sure that you would advise your founders and their fundraising momentum definitely helps. And so having some amount of it as you're starting. So starting a fund when you know that you like have some amount like ready to go, like having those conversations first, I think can really help, where it just creates momentum in your raise and then trying to do it in like a constricted way. Again, it's very analogous to raising for a company. The things that are not analogous is that as a venture firm, you're trying to own as much of a company as you can. You're trying to get back to founders as quickly as possible. When you are with institutional LPs, there's not a lot of incentives to come into a first close. They're like, oh, let me just wait until you have $1 million left and then I can come in, and like it's wait and see versus being first to commit. And having some of those early believers or true believers early on who can help give you momentum in that raise for a fund is definitely helpful.
Yes. Speaking of early believers, really quickly, you mentioned Charles Hudson, who by the way is on episode 10 of Drinks with the VC, and who also we're very thankful that he introduced us to Leshika. I wanted to know, I know Charles played some sort of role in catalyzing your decision but if you could, I know there's craziness happening in the background right now. She's muting herself because she's classy and very sweet right now. But Leshika, tell us a little bit about when you decided to just all right, fuck it, I'm going all in. We're gonna create Twine, and I'm gonna build this. What was
Yeah,
like?
so you referenced like the community. So that was the thing. So now I have a partner, but I did found the fund as a solo GP.
Yeah.
And so many people were like, oh, isn't it going to be lonely? And I will say it's really analogous to the founder community where there's such, especially now, I think, versus even 10 years ago where there were fewer new funds being built. There is such an amazing community of folks who have built their own firms,
Yeah.
who are incredibly supportive to each other, who introduce other managers to their LPs, who pay it forward around just guidance on building firms. So Charles is definitely one of those people, and he's been so helpful to me as I've built. Eva Ho is another one who's at Fika Ventures.
Yeah.
And there's just been like a number of others who have really come together where it's formally and informally. There's a number of WhatsApp groups and Slack channels and where people are just supporting each other. So it has been anything but like lonely, or I'm comparing deal notes. I'm comparing notes on what fund admin to use.
Yeah.
And you're really able to leverage the learnings of the broader community on best practices and firm building, while obviously putting your own special sauce on it with respect to your investment thesis and approach. But I'm like really just grateful to be building at this point in time where there's more firms. I think there's more firms being built than ever before, but there's also just more companies being built than ever before. And so I think it's just a really exciting time to be investing, both from, again, a talent perspective, as we talked about, the types of founders who are now building in these sectors of import is really exciting. I think from a technological advancement perspective and all the things that are happening and AI and data and all the things that we talked about are really great. And then also just from the more managers and like more types of managers than ever before, which we haven't really touched on the diversity aspect there. But I think that's just awesome that I think maybe this was before we started recording, but like the stereotype of the VC like looked a certain way and like, where is the Patagonia? I definitely do not like own any vest. It's like not so Vic is, he decided not to bust it out for
I don't actually, so to be clear to our audience, whether you're listening or watching, we're going to have people that are actually repeat audience members at this point. They're subscribing, so they know what's happening. But I just want to let everyone know I don't own a Patagonia vest, and I don't know if I'm proudly saying that or if I'm like,
you think that I
I'm
would
like begging
given all
Bree
the
to get me a
talks that,
Patagonia
like
vest.
talking we did about hiking and elk viewing, I own like a lot of Patagonia, but just not a vest.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Look, timing is everything, and timing is not. It's like it's a luxury at this point, and we know that you've taken out a lot of your time to speak with us and share your story with us. So we're gonna get down to the last bit of this. I want to say thank you for joining us, but I also want to ask you a question. Are you willing and ready to play Fidelity Five Questions with us?
What is that?
It's just, we're gonna ask you 5 questions more quickly. They're not long-winded. We're just gonna ask you
Is
a
it the
this
same
or a
questions
that.
every time, or is it?
It's
I'm
the
just
same
curious.
questions every time.
Oh, got
Sometimes
it.
we change them up a little bit, but yeah, for
Okay.
the most part, they're the same questions.
But maybe could have prepared for that. Okay.
We've changed a couple of them just because I think they weren't as interesting, but I like the ones we have
I like
today.
the ones we have now.
Okay,
All right,
sure.
okay. We're gonna ask you one more time, Leshika.
Is it Fidelity? Is this like a branded 5 questions section?
This is the branded.
Yeah.
This is the
Look at
branded.
you. Look at you guys. Speaking of sustainable businesses.
Yeah.
You're like bringing the sponsors. I love it.
I actually don't think that this is a sustainable business, primarily because my liver and kidneys will hate me. There's that. But okay, one more time, Leshika, are you willing to play?
I am ready.
5 questions with us.
I'm ready for Fidelity. Thank you to our generous sponsor, Fidelity 5 Questions.
Thank you. Once again, use Fidelity Private Shares. It's an amazing platform. I am trying to push it to all of my portfolio companies, not just because Fidelity is the sponsor, but because it really helps with cap table management and prevent having those red flags when you go to raise your next round of financing. Okay, here we go. Bree, do you want to kick it off?
I sure will. All
Okay.
right, what is your go-to karaoke song?
Okay, I'm trying to think of like my go-to versus so the go-to is probably like a prayer, but I think that's like
Wow.
pretty common. That was the last one. So I've randomly done karaoke twice in the last 6 months, which is probably more, that's two more times than I've done in the last 5 years. I know. So one was for a friend's birthday and I chose Like a Prayer and that was amazing. By the way, I have a terrible voice. I have a terrible voice. But I put a lot of like effort into it. And so I think that overcompensates. And the time before that, I did Calm Down, Rema and Selena Gomez because
Ooh,
I freaking love Afrobeats. Like I'm all Afrobeats
all
all the
about.
time these
I've
days.
got an amazing Afrobeat Spotify playlist, so I'll
Can you
send it to
please
you.
send it to me?
Yes, I will. I
I'm like
will. Absolutely.
obsessed. It is just like
Absolutely.
the best mix of all of the things, and that's like, well, I listen to these days.
Bree, did you know that
Which,
like a
by the way, it's
prayer?
very complicated to do because it's like the words are like it's
Oh
not.
yeah, there's a
It's
lot of
like
well, did you do it solo?
that was just with my family, so it was like my husband's birthday, so it's
That's cute.
with
Okay.
my
I would assume that your husband Chad would help you out with one of the portions. So it's just because it is. There's a lot of overlapping and
yeah.
it gets intense in some points. Okay, fine. Bree, by the way, I don't think we've asked you ever what your go-to karaoke song is. I'm interested in knowing, Bree. What's your
My
go-to
song?
karaoke? Yeah.
Oh, it's When I Think About You, I Touch Myself.
That is that like that that's also like
Wow.
that's like a really it's you gotta execute that in a
You
I
sure
did not see
do.
that coming.
well,
In all of our
well.
years of being friends, Bree, I did not see that coming.
You gotta take
Uh,
it takes a lot of confidence to do that one. Good
It
for you.
does. It does. So we all know this. I had no idea about this until today, actually. Uh, Like a Prayer was actually banned by the Vatican. I don't know if this
Hmm.
is common knowledge.
I can maybe see that because of like the blasphemous stuff that she does in the video.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, yeah, fair enough. All right, number two. If you could invest in any fictional startup from a movie, TV show, or book, what would it be?
A fictional startup. Like the first one that comes to mind is Pied Piper,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but I don't know if I watched enough of Silicon Valley to know what happened to it in the end because I had to stop watching it because it hit so close to home
So
because of
close to
all
home.
of the caricatures. Because I'm like, wait, I know all of these people,
Yeah,
and this is like too weird. So
yeah,
it probably
yeah.
flamed out, in which case you wouldn't want to be an investor in that.
It could be. So look, we've gotten precogs from Minority Report. I like hoverboards. Uh,
Ready
if
Player
it
One, that VR
Ready Player
Oh,
universe.
One,
Yeah, that's a popular
that's
one.
another big one. But that's
yeah.
okay. That's fine.
Okay.
I think sometimes you have to look at the stuff that won't work versus alongside the stuff that could. I'll accept it.
Pied Piper
Um,
flamed out then. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Ugh.
None of us could watch it.
I couldn't watch it all the way
I
through.
we
literally don't know
all,
what happened after
yeah,
the because
same.
I'm like, yeah.
We
Because
talked about
it hit hard. It
Yeah,
was
we
too
talked about
weird.
this a bit in our Brandon Farwell episode way back when, and renting out stadiums, etc., as investors all hit very close to home for all of us. Anyway, okay,
All
number
right.
three.
If you could do it all over again, would you be an investor or a builder?
I hate to thread the needle on that one, but the great thing about building Twine is that I get to do both. I'm building a firm. And so that is honestly why I built a firm versus I am a builder at heart. Like I was building new offices at Google. I was building like new public agencies. I was at a venture studio building companies, and I didn't even think to join an existing firm, but I knew I loved venture because of the kind of getting to see across so many different companies and theses and the intellectual curiosity that comes with it, but then also building at the same time, which is my company, which is the investment platform. So it's honestly like best of both worlds, and I couldn't be more grateful to be doing what I'm doing that ties together all the threads of everything that we've talked about on the episode to date and puts it together, like wraps a little bow around it.
Can I just say, I think Leshika for some sort of office in the future is not something I'd be
Mm-hmm.
surprised about.
Same. I could see her running for office.
I feel like I feel like that's not a compliment, maybe, but
No, it's a total
we
compliment.
need
People like you in office. Yeah, absolutely.
you're like, you're a little schmarmy. That's
No,
for the
schmarmy is
politician.
not what I said, by the way. Please don't put words in my mouth right now. There you go, being all politician-like on me. No, I think there's a relatability and a quality around leadership that you possess. And so there you go. Now that I've explicitly given you that compliment, you can say that it was in
Oh, I thank you.
best
Thank
of
you.
steads. Okay. All right. Here we go. Fidelity question number 4. What movie best fits the future of the human race? Wall-E, where we've all degenerated into an obese state due to anti-gravity in the metaverse. Avatar, where we are dominated by the quest for resources, new worlds, and are walking around in avatar bodies. Or The Matrix, where we're all in a simulation. We're taking the blue pill.
Okay, this has got to be the first podcast. I don't know if you ask that same question every time, but where
We do.
Wall-E has come up twice in the
Yes.
course of conversation.
It's a great movie,
We
by the way.
literally
So
just talked about how so much media is all around a dystopian future where, and like going back to the beginning, it's like none of the above. I don't want any of the above because these are
Yeah.
all depressing ass movies. And I wish that there was actually one of my friends from college is in Hollywood, producer, and it is all dystopian. I want to be making content that is, hey, what if we can have a positive environmental future because we've solved some of these problems and this is what this looks like. So she's actually like working on some films that will address that. I don't know that if I can think off the top of my head one that does paint a positive picture because they usually are. That wouldn't make for really good kind of cinematic tension where it's like everything is great and we've
right.
solved all the problems versus Snowpiercer. Yeah, after I saw Parasite, I watched a bunch of his other stuff, and I was like, "Oh God, this is so depressing." But
Yeah.
Snowpiercer is like another good one where we try to do climate adaptation and end up eating insects on a train that's just constantly circling the world. So I pick none of the above is my
None of
answer.
the above. All right. I think maybe we crave conflict and chaos too much to enjoy a movie that's just, this is all the good in us, and this is what
So
we could
you
do.
can make that movie, but it's a fish out of water comedy where you put someone who's really depressing into that utopia, and then they don't really understand how life could be so perfect.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, it's more of like a human kind of.
What is the one deal that you passed on that you wish you hadn't?
That is one. There's one that I'm like still thinking about. It's just again, it's just off the top of my head because I didn't know these questions in advance. I talked a lot about focusing on applications in specific markets where I'm investing in. There was a foundational model company recently that was looking at developing a model around 3D geometries, and they were trying to do more efficient chip design, more energy efficient chip design. And it was really interesting, but it was super early and it was like a hard time underwriting from a technical standpoint, but it was a special team. And there's some of these companies that you keep coming back to. So sometimes I think about that one, but that was just like a recent one. It's top of mind.
Love it. Love it. That was Fidelity 5 Questions. Thank you for playing with us. As a symbol of our thanks, we have one more box for you to open up. So take it out. Yep. There you
Thank you,
go.
Fidelity.
It's
Yeah,
time.
absolutely.
The final box.
Honestly, these are so thoughtful. I really appreciate it.
Oh, we're glad.
It's really, all right, okay.
She says that now, Bree.
Double. Uh-oh.
Just
No,
wait
no,
till
no.
she sees it.
Yeah, wait till she sees it.
This is, did you plant that conversation?
No,
Wow.
we did not.
With the logo and everything. Did you plant the conversation around the Patagonia vest?
I think you brought it up, so we did
Yeah,
not.
I honestly, you can go back
Did
to
you
the tape.
incept it? Where maybe you
Yes.
incepted.
The
and
Wally
then I
as
started
well.
talking about it.
Bree's very Christopher Nolan in nature, so maybe there was a little bit of inception going on.
This is amazing. Now, you guys, I thought I was a VC before, but now it's official.
It's official.
Boom, there you go. For all of those who are listening and not watching, There's a beautiful gray Patagonia vest with a Twine Ventures logo and a little bit of a Drinks with a VC logo, because we also like branding. We just rebranded not too long ago. We're just incredibly thankful and grateful for you to join us today on what was a pleasure to record with you and get your thoughts on everything, and really learn about you, the VC. And Bree, I don't know, I'm almost at a loss for words because I'm just sitting there going, I still want to keep going. Can we have like 2
I
more
know.
hours?
It's crazy. If it weren't so
Yeah,
late, which it already is.
I honestly, I was like, oh my God, what are we like? I don't have anything to talk about for what am I going to talk? I can't believe 3 hours flew by. This is amazing. Thank you so much.
So we like to end the episode with a toast. We will allow you to toast to anyone you want, whether it's friends, family, startup, LP, whoever you want. It is your floor.
Yes.
This is like my Twine Ventures Oscar speech. Obviously, family first and foremost. I have a really special three people in my life who just came home and are being super quiet right now while we finish up here. First and foremost, thank you to them for being so supportive. Again, like very much kind of building a startup myself, so it's just a lot to navigate, and they've been really incredibly supportive. But then also to all the LPs who backed me in Fund One, and the founders who took a bet on a new firm and have been amazing to partner with. And yeah, I'm just couldn't be more grateful. As I mentioned to you guys at the beginning, we had our second ever annual meeting last week that just went really well, and I just took a step back. I was like, this is a very special ecosystem that's come together, and I'm just grateful to be building at this moment in time with these people and on these problems. And so thank you guys for having me on and letting me share a little bit more about that.
Cheers to hope in our future.
Yes, thank you. Cheers.
Thanks for cozying up and listening to another episode of Drinks with a VC. We are so grateful for our listener support. Feel free to reach out and add any of your questions to the comment section. If you have an idea for a guest or have some feedback, reach out to us on LinkedIn.
If you liked that last episode, be sure to check out our others featuring VCs from Lightspeed, Bessemer, Hannah Gray, BTV, and Norwest. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Cheers!